Right. It's a huge investment that people make. I'm sorry, were you saying something more?
No, that's
yeah.
Generally, I was like, success stories.
Right. You know, what I was wondering is if there are community partners in the room who've been successful in applying for grants who can tell us about how they've done that in terms of their time. Yeah.
Well, we got involved in this grant. The CDC started with the community group.
Mm-hmm.
This is the group that I work with, which started working in the tobacco cessation many years ago.
Uh-huh.
And that was the root of why our Attorney General went to start a local campaign and got a local $1 billion, and she became governor of Washington.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
that's a very good result.
Yeah.
From small to getting millions of dollars for this,
Mm-hmm.
and being governor of Washington. But the difficulty is when one small organization starts to apply for the grant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many times we were in the target.
Yeah.
And then on the national prevention campaign came, and the thesis that there are these millions of dollars and we are going to get as much, then we were to get a fortune.
Mm-hmm.
But this is just joint grant, not the structural thing. So it was
Yeah.
very successful, but that was really accident.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to plan this kind.
Right, right. It is a really tough, but I do see a partner behind you who may have some comments.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like the context probably all really vary depending on the community that you're working in, but in some of the work that I did internationally with very vulnerable populations in community, war-affected communities, we found that actually not having the money up front meant that you kind of cycled through the people who were there for the quick benefits, and then they realized that that wasn't coming and they exited. And you got the people entering the program and kind of entering the partnership who were really committed because of their strong passion. So in a way, it was an unanticipated thing. We weren't, we had a small amount of money at the beginning, and the fact that we couldn't give, per diems, or we couldn't give any kind of incentives actually meant that the people who were there for year 2 when the money came were the most committed and heartfelt people. And so, I wouldn't necessarily see it as exclusively a problem if you don't have the money at the beginning to work on something. That might actually mean that the people who are present are the ones that you want on board, who have that passion and that drive.
And I wondered too if your question was like, how do you get the time to actually put in the grant application if you don't have money to pay somebody to work on a grant application? Is that part of your question? And I saw another hand raised. Do you have a comment?
I just want to be careful about this, assuming that if people can't give up their time, that if they do need the resources, that they're somehow less committed. Because I think that we all have to recognize that people are living in a social context, often even experiencing need, and they just can't give up the time if there's not some resources to support them. It doesn't mean that they don't care. It means that they're in a situation where they need to find a way to support themselves and their community. So I just think it's really important to be careful about placing value on that.
I don't know if you wanted to clarify your comment or if that's...
Oh, well, we were just saying it's both. I mean, obviously that is the situation. In the context that I was working in,
Yeah,
that
you
wasn't
have
the situation. But I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
That exists.
Yeah.
And anyone who wants more information about my context, I'm happy to talk about it at some point.
Great, yeah. But coming back to the original question, I don't have an answer for how community groups put the time toward a grant application. I don't know some of the methodology that they've used to be able to carve out the time. But I think it's an important question to try to network with other community groups that have been successful in putting together an application with really limited resources. And I wish I could answer your question, but I just don't know the answer. I don't know if you have.
This is an issue that I think came up on the CCPH listserv that you, and this and it really speaks to realizing that when you work for a community organization, you're providing a service, and when you're working on a grant proposal, that might take away from the service you're providing to the community, and that's a very real concern. And how to make sure the community organization is being well funded, supported, while they're making these efforts to get grants out and get something that can bring more money in, but you got to start somewhere. And there's no easy question for that. I mean, no response for that. That's a hard question. And this is, I was glad to see it on the listserv because that means there's a dialogue starting where hopefully we'll get to a point where either a funder or another separate organization that can't add bias into the process of getting a grant, but can support community organizations so they have the capacity to write good grant proposals. There's a training part, but there is that part of, there's some real dollars that are needed. I mean, that's how I look at it. I've seen some creative grants where there'll be some training included, where they'll say in year one we might not have money to pay the community organization, which it scares you, but we're going to provide a level of training, something that is beneficial to this community group that they've identified as, we need training in X, Y, Z. That might, so there are some ways that does get built into grants, but there's still that before you get the grant part that we don't really have a good solution right now to say, for community groups wanting to do this, to incentivize it. Yes, sir.
Well, we found that in almost any community you go to, you find people ready to volunteer. We have been successful in that respect. We put how much it would cost. Like, for instance, I was an international consultant, so my fee was very high. So we put the number of hours that I donate. We said it, so it is an amount of money. And we said this is our counterpart, not in terms of dollars, but in the volunteer what we do. Our organization has what volunteer. So we said this is how much we have put there in our time, they take it into consideration. So that's something that we have, it's possible to explore. I haven't found one community that doesn't have people ready to tell the community.
And it's great. I think that's wonderful. There are people willing to volunteer their time. And then I want to look at the other side of, and this is thinking broadly, not just for one funding or two funding agencies. As a field, how can we also, pay people for the time and effort that they're putting into this? Whether they get the grant or not. I mean, that's a real deal, and that's a bigger discussion.
I have a comment on that too. We have a CBDR with UCSF, a community-based organization, and one thing I think that's really important is transparency. Because for us, we have to be, for example, transparent to our executive team and our executive director, who will ask, "Oh, so you're putting money into this away from direct service? Is that viable for our agency and for our clients? Can they afford for you to be gone while you do this?" And I think for us, it is a risk, and we have to really trust our community partners. And one way we do that is we're constantly talking about money. It's pretty constant. Okay, so are you guys getting money for this? And I think partly is we don't know where our UCSF partners are getting money. So it's nice to hear that they also are taking a risk, where they're saying we don't have money right now either. And then at the point, I think we come to this, are there development grants out there? What gets really frustrating is when we hear, our partner actually had gotten funding for development, and they didn't share that with us. Because we're developing too. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. But it's one of those that we wonder about, I know academic partners can apply for a design grant or development grant, or when they can apply for that. Are the community partners built into the budget for that as well? Because we don't have, as community partners, budget for that. And you're right, we are so
I think that's a fantastic point. So this is exactly what I was talking about, asking successful community organizations how they have supported even working on a grant application. So that was an excellent point about finding out what your partner is getting and then asking if you can share that to develop the grant. And then also an excellent point about actually applying for a grant to develop an idea. That's great. And then I think.
Well, I'm going to say, I think the word, I have a hard time with the word volunteer. I think everyone is investing.
Yep.
Their time, our academic partners are investing their time as they could have been working on a different proposal.
Good point.
Instead of with us on the one that we're working together on, and we could have been working on a different something or other. But it's not only onboarding our executive team, it's also onboarding our staff. It's really having to get their buy-in, who are on the ground working with the clients, that this is worth their time to take away from their clients. And that was, we had to have a full disclosure and transparency around taking this all the way up the conceptual chain of why we are taking you away from your clients to train you on something that's different. Not a mission drift, but it's an enhancement of what you already do.
Makes sense.
And that was something that we came to, I think, as a team organically, like, oh wait, we can't, the tree doesn't leave without them.
So
And so
true.
that was also an investment of their faith
Yep.
and trust and us sharing their information.
And I think that I really like the discussion in the room because it's something to really think about, that all too often non-academic folks get asked to volunteer their time, yet their time has just as much value as an academic person. So it's really something to think about as you move forward and you form your partnerships, interviewing the academic partner about sort of what's their approach to things, and then for academic partners to interview their community partner about what their approach is to things, to finding that commonality. And what the other thing that's really been neat about, I think, this week is just meeting so many folks who are like-minded about sharing of resources. So there's a lot of encouragement seeing that folks on both sides, academic and community, are invested in sharing those resources. And I think we have like about 5 more minutes, so. We're over,
But maybe one more.
Okay, one more question.
And this could be more for the group and as well as you, but how do you deal with the disparities among academic salaries and the nonprofit salaries, which sometimes are quite dramatic, and then that you might have indirects that are charged? I know with both of you, you're allowing community-based organizations to charge indirects as well, but with many federal grants, they don't have a negotiated rate, that's not possible, and so that it can just, like, having worked as a community-based organization and now at the university, I know when we looked at the academic side of the budget, it looked, astounding to us. How can it cost this much? And so I'm just curious, with wanting to be fully transparent, how are you having those types of discussions? And how are the community-based organizations feeling? Because I've been on both sides and I was uncomfortable on both sides. I felt the right comfort level.
I think one of the biggest things that really I thought about as you were speaking is the importance of funding organizations to really understand how important indirect costs are. And so both on the university side and the community side, that you don't do this work for free. So somebody still has to take the time to fill out the forms and put the reports together for the funder. This is, it costs in resources to administer a grant. So I think there's a lot of discussion that has to happen between funders on how are they going to support CBPR. And a big piece of that is indirect costs. So I don't have the solution to it, but I know that there are conversations that have to happen and that are starting to happen. Yes. Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe
you don't explain very well what I meant when we said that we volunteer. We work in a coalition that many different groups. And what we learned all of these years we have been working together is that we can work together, writing grants, etc. But we the ones who have time, we are the ones who look for the grants, and we volunteer in that part that help all of the different organizations that belong to ours to prepare the grants, etc. and ask for the grant. But in the moment in which in real work, we pay everybody, and we insist that the grant gives money to anybody who comes to the real work. They get compensated. And this is something that for us is part of the equity. So I was talking about two different stages of the development of the project. And we learned how not to compete, but to collaborate. This is why we have this success.
I'm glad that these discussions come up about money and power sharing. It really gets to some of the vital elements of CBPR, because these are the issues of having the transparency, a very open dialogue early on about who's doing, the lion's share of the work and how it's distributed and how the money aligns with that work. And I just also want you to, as someone writes a grant proposal, this is described. Reviewers are very savvy and noticing if someone has a salary of this amount and why are they charging X amount of their salary to this grant when they might have other grants? And why isn't that money going to the community organization? Or why does it look like 80% is going on this side versus the other? It has to be justified. When the budgets are written, when the breakdowns of who gets paid what, in the grant proposal, there's a justification for that. And if it looks lopsided or weird, reviewers will comment and say, this doesn't look fair, it doesn't look equitable, something's up here. So there is some process to try to inform that. I mean, it's great, it helps when there's an open dialogue first, because then this is laid out very clearly. It is, and we've had some PI investigators at the academic side have been very understanding and say, I get X amount from this, so I'm only going to get 5% off of this grant, even if I'm going to put in 30% of work on it. Because I want the community organization to do it. Or I'll see the primary, we usually have like a primary and secondary, even if both names are attached to a grant, the community organization is the primary, the lead person on that grant. Or we have two separate budgets and we submit our own budget reports and this is how it's laid out. So that is decided by the group. That's an individual or a partnership level decision. And the program officer, we can help inform and guide it, but the decisions come from the group.
So it looks like we're going to wrap now. So thank you so much for the opportunity to come present to you today. We really appreciated being able to be here for this time.
So I think these were really excellent keynotes to end our week. CBCRP and TRDRP are really leaders in, among the funding agencies in advancing CBPR for health equity. And they, my experience of that, both of these funders is that they've been around for a really long time, committed to funding CBPR and to funding research that has meaningful outcomes. And I think we see with the funding agencies that sometimes that commitment wavers or it can go away with shifts in the wind. But TRDRP and CBCRP have really stuck with it, and they're so committed. And so I really wanted to give a big shout out and thank you to the work that you're doing. So we're gonna spend the next sort of 25, 30 minutes focused on a couple of things. One, there's a 3-page evaluation of the Institute that is going around. And as I said before, we would really love for you to take a little bit of time right now and complete this. But then we don't want you to go away because we would like to do a little bit of group discussion around collective learnings from the Institute. We did this last time, and it's really nice for us to kind of share in an open space what each of us is taking away from the Institute and taking into our communities to do this important work for equity and for social justice. So we'd like to have a little bit of dialogue around that.